Hello and welcome to Nimdzi Live. My name is Tucker Johnson. I am your host today as we experience Nimdzi Live, where we talk about the latest and greatest in translation, localization, internationalization, culturalization, and all that fun stuff global companies need to delight their international customers, or at least to not piss them off too much. On this program, we invite guests who like to have fun and have some value to add for our audience of globalization professionals. I'm always eager to provide a platform to those with a good story or a good data set. So let us know if there are any topics you'd like covered or guests we should reach out to for future episodes. Excuse me, if you haven't already done so, make sure that you are subscribed to Nimdzi Insights or following us on your social media platform of choice. We are coming to you live today on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, Facebook, and I believe that's it, and YouTube, of course. And of course, all of these episodes for Nimdzi Live, as well as other content, can be found on the Nimdzi Insights YouTube channel, where we archive everything. Quickly, before we get into our episode today, I want to give a quick shout out to the Localization Today podcast. Many of you guys are familiar with Multilingual Magazine. Many of you are subscribers. Of course, we are going to be featuring some content from Multilingual Magazine today in this episode, but what you might not know is that there is a podcast that, if you like the daily news about our industry that is published on multilingual.com, you can also find that in audio format in short snippets. So it's an easy way to stay up to date on industry news wherever you are. You can subscribe on your platform of choice, available on Spotify, Overcast, Apple Podcasts, Castro, Pocket Cast, you name it. You just search for Localization Today podcast and you can find that. As far as upcoming events, I don't have a lot on the calendar right now, but today is another double feature. I will be talking to Mark Schreiner right after this. We're going to be hearing some exciting stuff about RFP management processes, which is a big topic for not only myself, but for a lot of clients here at Nimdzi Insights. So I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Quick intro to today's topic. As we dive in this episode, we are going to be speaking with Marina Ilari, who is CEO of Terra Translations, of course. We're going to be discussing the challenges, rewards, and factors that contribute to the success of video game localization. We will also analyze a case study of the localization of Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, which is also available in the September issue, also known as the Kate Edwards issue, on page 56 of Multilingual Magazine. Translators and ninjas. So you can follow along with us there. We'll be pulling some quotes directly from the article. Marina is CEO of Terra Translations, a global localization and LQA company. Marina has over 17 years experience in the localization industry and a lifetime experience as a gamer. In 2017, she received the Women-Owned Business Enterprise Rising Star Award presented by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation to a young business with great promise. And in 2020, she received the Enterprising Women of the Year Award. In 2022, Terra Translations was listed by Inc. magazines as one of the fastest growing private companies in America. Marina, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Did
I
I
am excited to be here.
did
And
I
it's live,
it,
which makes me really nervous.
it's live. But that's by design. We're supposed nervous means dynamic, right? We,
Yes.
we can't be too scripted here on this podcast. So you have quite the resume. Of course, I've known you for quite some time. We've been working with Terra Translations for some time and collaborating with Multilingual Magazine. You're a frequent contributor to Multilingual Magazine. Tell us a little bit about Terra Translations and the work that you do there.
Oh, goodness. Well, Terra Translations was actually founded by my mother. So I am the second generation CEO of the company. I've been the CEO now for 6 years. We began 25 years ago, or should I say my mother began the business 25 years ago, mainly focused in Spanish and Latin America. And since then, it's grown into a multilingual business, and we do a lot of video games. In fact, a large portion of what we do is related to video game localization and LQA.
Yeah, and I'm really fascinated by that. And before we jump into case studies and video games and talking about Sekiro, which I know a lot of people are excited to hear about because they love the game, and there's some interesting localization case studies to be had there. But before we jump into that, I'm really interested in Terra. You guys weren't always a video game company.
No.
And so I want to pick your brain on this a little bit because I know there's a lot of LSPs that would love to break into the game localization space.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I've said this on previous episodes, but in my mind, the game localization space is kind of insulated. It's kind of, there's a high barrier to entry there. There's some gatekeeping, if you want to use that term. I don't like that term, but it's hard to get into. Let's just say for an
It's
LSP
a
that
very
doesn't have
particular
experience.
niche.
Yeah,
Yes, it is a very particular niche. And the clients you'll be working with are like usually people who are extremely passionate about video game localization. That's why they pursued a career in something that they were like super passionate about and super usually knowledgeable about, right? So I think in that sense, it is a very particular niche if you are trying to get in and you perhaps don't understand the industry or you don't care as a whole about the industry. Like those potential clients will can tell right away if
right.
you know what you're talking about, if you're part of their community, right? So for us, being part of that community actually meant many years of attending conferences and events and talking to people and doing presentations and writing about it. And it took years and years. It was not like an overnight thing that we said, oh, now we're going to be doing game localization because Marina is really interested in that, right?
Right.
It wasn't like that. It was years and years. And I remember the leadership of my team at one point was doubting that we should continue investing in this industry because we were not seeing returns.
Right.
But I had
Well,
this
to
was
be
like a really
honest,
strong vision on my part that I had really my eyes set. Like I knew this was the industry that I wanted Terra to continue to pursue, and I could see it. But yes, it was a long journey. I can tell you that.
well, I know because I've been watching you along the way. You've been working, Nimdzi and Terra has been working together for a number of years now. And I mean, just being honest, there were times when I was like, "Oh, I don't know if they're investing in,
Yeah,
I don't want to
there were
discourage
several
them."
people who were like, including my mom, like
Sure.
she's watching, Mom, I love you. But my mom at some point was like, Marina, are you sure this is the path we should continue to take?
Yeah. So that
But
I
I
mean,
was just so sure of this, Tucker. Like there was no doubt in my mind. Like
you were
this
called
was
to it.
the path that we needed to take. Yeah, but it was tough to get those people doubting it because it's it's a lot. It's a lot of investment of time and effort and energy, and yeah, and just carrying your team through that vision too, right? To have them have the buy-in from them and believe in it.
Yeah, and it's a lot about just street cred, right? Credibility
Mhm,
in the gaming
mhm.
space. Like people, they want to
Yes.
know, like, are you a gamer? Like, do you
Mhm,
understand
mhm.
our user base? Do you understand the complexities
Exactly.
behind this? And
Exactly.
it's not like a lot of other industries where an LSP can just easily start going into a different vertical because they
Mhm.
create a supply chain for it, right?
Right. Exactly.
And you actually
Exactly.
need to be eating, breathing, and sleeping this stuff,
Yeah, so it's
which
all
you guys
about
do.
creating trust, right? Like, and creating that likability within your clients and your vendors, but also like mainly trust. Like, do they trust that that you know how to do things and that you're doing things right, and that you, just like you said, understand the industry inside out, understand their target audience, right? Those gamers that they're trying to reach. And there's no better to understanding than to be one yourself, right? Like, you can like
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
relate
it.
to their clients, and that's where I think it's a really good match. But I think that's why not many companies specialize in this niche, because it is a very particular and kind of close knitted niche that is kind of hard to get into if you don't have that experience. It takes time. It can be done, obviously. I mean, we did it, but it does take a lot of time and vision.
Well, and I know like you guys have such geek cred that you even have a podcast. Let me pull it up here. This is the Terra homepage for those of you that want to go check it out, terratranslations.com. You can find
Yeah,
out
check us out.
more about what they do. But what I wanted to show y'all is the Open World is just launched season 2. Tell us, what is Open World?
Yes, open world. This is a passion project that my team created 3 years ago, and we did a season one about a year and a half ago. It finished, I believe, and now we're on season two. And Multilingual was so generous to want to partner with us for this, and it's basically a video cast talking about video game localization, localization in general, but with a strong focus on video game localization and like some nerdy topics of the
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like that's the term that comes to mind is nerdy when I think of it. I'm glad you said it first. I wasn't going to say it,
yeah.
but
I
if
say it with all my love because I consider
exactly.
myself one.
Well, it's that intersection between video game nerdiness and localization nerdiness. Because a lot of people like to
Yes,
geek out on
yes.
localization.
Very passionate about both. Like, you
Yes,
get them together and it's like magic.
exactly. And it's the only podcast out there of its kind, as far as I know. So I wanted to make sure that we gave that a plug. But let's
We
go.
have great guests, so definitely check it out.
Great
We have
hosts
great
and great
guests with
guests.
great
Yep.
insights. So
Well, let's go into. You recently published, as I was mentioning in my intro, the translators and ninjas,
mhm.
localizing Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. And for those of you that are fellow game geeks or From Software fans, you know Sekiro. It needs no introduction. But for those people out there that aren't, tell us a little bit about Sekiro. What's the game? What was? Give us the background.
Yes, the game is from Software. It was published in 2019, and it won Game of the Year. So this is a big deal for the gaming community. And yeah, the game is based in a fictional feudal Japan world, where you play as a ninja and you have to basically save this young lord that has the potential of um, being immortal through his blood. I don't know. It sounds kind of complicated,
It's
but
a From
basically
Software game. It's a From
you're a
Software
ninja.
game. Is all you need to say.
Yeah.
Don't try to understand it. Sorry.
It's a role playing game. Just to make it really simple, it's a role playing action game where
Yeah.
you play as a ninja.
Yeah.
There, I could have said it so much more simpler.
And I love this. Translators are like ninjas. You quoted at the end of your article, but I'm going
Hmm.
to start this episode
Hmm.
with it. Translators are like ninjas. If you notice them, they're no good. And I
Yes.
love this quote. I love this quote
Mm-hmm.
because translation, the idea, we've all heard this before, but the idea behind a good translation is you don't even know it's there. It feels like it was
Hmm.
written or
Right.
produced in your native language. And where you actually notice the translation is when someone somewhere screws up something,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And if there
Then
is
translation is in the news, right?
yeah, and if there is an audience or a fan base that loves pointing out flaws in products, I would say the gaming community ranks up there with
Oh my
that. They
goodness.
will pick through
Yes.
everything with a fine tooth comb,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of brings us into the discussion here about your experience with Sekiro,
Yes.
because not only are you localizing from
Mhm.
English into, well, tell us, the experience. I'm assuming Spanish or Spanish localization, or
We
the.
did not localize this game, by the way.
Oh,
This is all
okay,
my
okay.
own personal research
So
of
you
what the
are one of the
localization
rabid
was like.
fans.
Yes,
You are.
I
This is
and
just
reading and
you.
also
Okay.
reading, which was really interesting, reading what the fans were saying about the game, right? Because something really interesting that happened with this game in particular is that um, there were mods created around the game. So mods are like
Yeah.
modifications or alterations of the game where the fans go and change things. And one of the things that were changed somewhat drastically was actually the translation, because many fans were not happy with how some of the names were localized, some of the meaning was lost behind, some of the cultural references were lost behind it. And again, these details can be kind of like idiosyncratic, like it could be some stylistic preferences on the fans, so to say. There were some supposed fixes to also some terms that were not translated correctly
Mhm.
or omitted or things like that that the mod developers mention. But I thought it was really interesting to analyze because it's a game so full of archaic words and cultural historical references. It's a game that has references to mythology and philosophy and Buddhism and all these things. So incredibly
A lot of
difficult
things
and
that just
complicated to
don't
translate.
don't translate, right? Because
Hmm.
like in order to get the punchline, so to
Hmm.
speak, you have
Yeah.
to know Japanese culture because it's so
Hmm.
deeply rooted in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
And
and the fact that we are talking about ninjas, this was really interesting because actually that phrase that you just showed about translators are like ninjas,
mhm,
that actually came to me at the end when I was finishing the article. Like I was
mhm.
like, this is so cool. I'm talking about translations and ninja, and I remember this phrase. It was kind of like a realization that I had, like, oh, there's actually a really famous quote about ninjas and translators, and it's this quote. And basically, in my article, what I do, which obviously the phrase as we understand it, it makes perfect sense because of what we were discussing, right?
Yeah,
You don't want translators to be uh, the translation to be noticed, right? You
right.
want it to sound and resonate and feel like it was written just for you as an audience member, right? But really, in my article, what I challenge is like maybe we should notice translators more. Like maybe translators as ninjas. This concept, I kind of want to like shake it up
Mhm.
because by noticing translators and just including them and not having it be an afterthought, it's just it could be a much better experience for the localization of the game, so to say. So that was sort of my my ending of the article. You can check it out and tell me what you think. But I'm kind of challenging that phrase and thinking that maybe we should notice translators a bit more and make it part of the process a bit more.
Well, but when you say that, let's be clear. When you say that, you're talking more about not necessarily that you want translators to be noticed by the end users,
Mhm.
noticing their translations, but that you want them to be more included in the process. And this isn't something I would
Exactly.
say is unique to video game localization. We're always fighting
Mhm.
to move localization upstream, so to speak,
Yes,
right?
correct.
And I did pull a quote from your article you said about localization as an afterthought. You say, when localizing a game that is rich in culturally specific references and details, it is imperative that language experts be involved from the very beginning. From the perspective of a localization professional, being involved in the design and production phase avoids rushing the process and produces a more impactful result. And I
Mhm.
think this pretty much captures the sentiment we're trying to get across here. But
Yes.
maybe is there like an example from the game where or this could be? And I know you used one about like the name of a palace slash
Mhm.
clan that's
Yeah,
within the
some
game.
of the translations that were corrected according to the mod creators had to do with things that perhaps there wasn't enough context there, right?
Hmm.
But yes, there are specific examples about names of characters that let's say like for example, there's one that's called the Guardian Ape, and the name in Japanese is actually monkey ape, no monkeys something, lion, monkey lion. And yeah, so the many fans were not happy that they changed the name. It makes it seem that the ape is there to guard the lotus when actually he's. Anyways,
Yeah.
so just think about the game that fans who like, and again, like these are like these these people are the, there is like great fanatism surrounding certain IPs, right?
Hmm.
Like people are super passionate about this, right? It's really truly part of their life. So they want to see that commitment in the localization. And again, many things could be stylistic or preferential, but others, and in this case, people felt that many of the names were missing certain key aspects that they wanted to
Yeah.
see. Like, oh, actually, this name, like this dragon, is actually referring to the sakura tree from Japan, right? And in the localization, by translating as divine dragon or something like that, that's completely lost. Or this is actually a reference to this Japanese clan, and don't you see like the architecture of the place is referring to that clan, and how come it's not transpassed in the name? It's, again, many things, and I have to say here, many of the things are not like the localizer's fault, so to say, because
Sure.
many
Sure.
times we have character restrictions, for example, that really prevent uh, the localizers from providing a name that explains the whole reference, right? You need to come up with a name that will be short enough to fix in the UI. Um, but yeah, I'm rambling here. But
No, no, this yeah, I'm learning. You're rambling, but I'm learning. So keep rambling, please. I'll bring up another quote here, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about here. Talking about moving localization left in the value chain or in the content
Mhm.
creation chain. And you say communication and collaboration as key ingredients to localization. Overall, I believe the localization work of Sekiro Shadows Die Twice was a massive endeavor for the localization team and one to be celebrated given the large number of archaic words and cultural and historical references. The mixed reviews surrounding the localization could be due to how different factors in the development phase can be affected by the lack of involvement of the localization team. The developers took great care in portraying aspects of Japanese history and culture in beautiful detail, but unfortunately, this immersive experience was sometimes lost in other languages. While some details may be idiosyncratic, their interaction with story elements could lead to the story not making sense to Western players. And this, to your point about, it's not necessarily the localizer's fault because
Mhm.
if something has a deeper cultural or historical meaning or is like a play on words or a double
Mhm.
entendre or something like that, that information isn't necessarily getting to the localizer because of the workflow. And so this is supporting of the case that you're saying is like it would be better outcome for localization could be making sure that localization is involved earlier on in the process. But what I want to ask you is, in practical terms, what does that look like, getting localization involved earlier in the process? And I guess a follow up question to that would be, is that feasible in a real world environment? Because I know it's easy to say yes, we need to be involved
Yeah,
earlier, but
yeah,
there's timelines to be hit, and everyone's got
yeah.
different goals. And talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I do believe it's very feasible actually to get localization involved early, and that might look many different ways. It might look in the getting them involved with how things are going in the development, like where are they going with the game, what things are they thinking, like the names that they're creating, the spaces that they're creating. Though there are many things that can come up just right there and then to a localizer, where they're like, okay, this is gonna be a problem for these languages, or this might be a problem for this culture. So perhaps we can think about adapting it this other way, right? So you're in time there in the design phase to apply those changes. Whereas when they come afterwards, when the game has already been developed, and it's usually traditionally done this way, right? It's after the game's been developed,
Right.
it is sent to localization, and then many issues come up there where localizers are kind of having to juggle things that cannot be changed. So
Yeah.
we need to adapt it somehow for this
Yeah.
market,
Figure it
right?
out.
But many games actually have involved, especially when games have certain aspects that will be particularly sensitive to a certain market. Um, uh, Legally, for example.
Well, there's all sorts of rating systems, and
Mhm,
I
mhm.
know it's regulated. I mean, not
Right,
so
right.
regulated as like life sciences, perhaps, but
Mhm.
there are different regulations for what can and can't
No,
go into video
definitely.
games.
Yeah, there are certain things you can show in certain markets, and certain things you cannot show in certain markets. Like you cannot show blood, or you cannot show
Right.
skeletons, or you cannot show zombies, or you cannot show people with four fingers, like random things that
Okay.
for certain markets, like they're not acceptable. So
Yeah.
they so so those are things that it's really important to tackle before you launch the game, and that's where localization I think can really help. And maybe that's in the way of getting a localization consultant, instead of getting like the
Right.
whole localization team, right? It could be like getting a localization consultant as part of the team when you are developing the actual game.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You don't necessarily need a full localization team involved at that early stage, but
Hmm.
we've done work like that here at Nimdzi Insights, where we'll do a
Hmm.
cultural review of a video game, in
Right,
before it goes
right.
to localization, and it's frequently a Japanese game that we'll be
Hmm.
reviewing.
Hmm.
And particularly with the Japanese games, there's this added complexity because, and you're the expert here, so I'll let you speak on it. But typically, they're developed in Japanese, but then for the localization purposes, rather than finding Japanese to German translators and Japanese to French translators and all
Hmm.
that stuff, typically they're translated into English as a first step, and then the English is used for the localization process. And in my mind, that's, I mean, it's not ideal, just because it's a copy of a copy of a copy at
Hmm.
that point, right? So there's two different phases where mistakes or faux pas can be introduced. One is the translation from Japanese to English, and the other from English into the other language. Can elaborate
Yeah.
a little bit on that process, because I think it's a fascinating workaround that's been
Yeah,
created.
you kind of lose a layer of nuance, right, by doing that. But
Yeah.
yes, it is most often than not, games who are developed in, say, Japanese or Chinese usually will be localized into English and from English into all other languages, right? So for this one in particular, like I was really intrigued because I played the game in Japanese with Spanish subtitles, and there were European Spanish subtitles. So I was actually comparing some of the things that the mod developers talked about, like some of the names and the references that were lost in the localization of the names. And it turns out like the Spanish version were all matching the English, right? So like the guardian Abe was Simio Guardian in Spanish, right? So just exactly matching the English. It wasn't like
And the
the
English
Spanish
was
could
already not matching the Japanese. So that's not something that the
exactly,
Spanish
exactly,
localizer even
exactly.
could have known.
So in those, I mean, it can be done really well, and it is usually done really well if you have a really solid localization into English. But again, it's that nuance that kind of gets lost in
Yeah.
the, from one language and then from that language to another language. So you're farther away from the original version, so to say.
Yeah, just another layer of complexity up in there.
Another layer of complexity. But sometimes it's interesting to actually get the original source, even as a reference.
Mhm.
Just if you find a name, especially for proper names and things that names that carry meaning, that are proper names but carry some sort of meaning, having that reference, even if the translators don't particularly speak, for example, in this case, Japanese, and being able to check what the Japanese version actually means could lead to a different interpretation. So I think I always advise, and I think it's useful to actually have the original source language as well, even if
Yeah.
we are translating from English.
Well, and are there like footnotes? Laura Lobato Bars in the comments says footnotes aren't always available, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Like, how good of a job do the developers do of actually footnoting and adding comments and
Mhm.
stuff like that? Or would that be the job of a localization consultant, as you mentioned?
Mhm. It depends. I mean, it
It
depends
depends.
so
Yeah,
much.
it
Like,
always
are we
depends.
talking
The
about like
standard
a
answer in our
super
industry.
mature AAA developer that has an in-house localization team, or are we talking about an indie developer who's never localized their game and they're completely new to it, right? So they're going to need a lot more consulting and a lot more hand-holding and a lot more advice from the translation team or whomever decides to localize the game. I think in those cases where you don't get all those that Laura mentioned footnotes, but yeah, it can be like string context or just like context information that is
Yep.
vital to the game. It's very important to establish a process to be able to get those. What this could be in the sense of like maybe a description, or it could be an image or a video or something
Yeah.
that shows what we're localizing.
And
And
how?
and some developers are super proactive in this, like they
Okay.
will provide you with this, and others you will need to help them cope with.
Query sheets.
Mhm.
Right.
Yes, a query sheet. So it could be more proactive, even like even before they send the localization bundle, right? It could be like, make sure you prepare the files this way, and we need this information in the strings, like, because
Okay.
it gives us like the context. So just helping them export the files correctly and get all the context that we can get from those strings.
And what? So let's say there is, I don't want to say a bad translation, but an less than ideal translation. You
Mm-hmm.
know, talking about guardian apes, right? For example,
Mm-hmm.
translation doesn't capture everything. You mentioned the modding community, and for Sekiro, there was a mod that was released that fixed a lot of the translations or improved a lot of the translations. How often in do game developers actually modify translations via patches, post-release patches, and
Oh, that is
updates?
so common. That is very,
Is
very
it
common.
okay? So they actually
Mhm.
do that.
Yes,
Okay,
yes. I mean, of course, it depends on the game and the developer and the like, but it is common that translation bugs or errors or things are patched.
okay.
Yeah, and then you don't see them once you update the game. Which I mean, if you have the opportunity to do that, that's really great to be able to do that,
Yeah.
to fix
Well,
it and not just leave the error there lingering with all angry fans in forums
there's a lot of bugs.
talking about it.
Yeah, translation's just one of them.
Yeah.
So, another going to the comments here. Daniel says, "Can you please talk about the menus and lore? How the menus and lore are localized, and how common is it that translated strings don't fit the UI elements?" So, kind of two different
Mhm.
questions there. Menus and lore, I
Mhm.
imagine, bring their own complexities
Yeah.
to it.
I mean, for games, that's the thing. Like, you need to understand the lore of the game, like the whole context of the game. Like, where does it come from? Is this are there previous versions of the game, for example, or is it based in a particular work of art, or a particular director that worked on other series? Like, you need to really truly understand the game's universe to be able to localize correctly, or at least be given all the reference needed to be able to localize correctly. In terms of buttons, again, it depends so much on the developer and on the game. Are we talking about like a mobile game? Obviously, there's like a lot more restrictions in terms of characters that can fit in the UI and things like that. So those tend to be a lot trickier. And again, it also depends on the language, right? There are languages that are incredibly tricky when it comes to character and character restrictions, and how they show in the UI. Thai comes to mind, for example. This is a really tricky language for buttons and UI, because they have really long, without no segmentation, phrases, right? And you need to know where
to break
you can introduce a line break without the meaning changing drastically. Same for Chinese. This is another language that's really tricky because some of the characters actually use double characters. So they're just tricky languages, and languages that go from right to left, and have all sorts of
I was debating
really
whether even to bring that up,
challenges
the
for
RTL. And as you were talking, I was like, should I ask about right to left languages? And I was like, no, I'm not going to ask about that.
That's a whole different topic. We could talk about that. But yeah, that's really tricky for the UI, because you really do need to rethink it, basically. And you can use the mirroring. That definitely helps.
Gets you part of the way there.
Yeah. So ideally the design team will work with you to redesign some of the things, so that those speakers get the same experience, basically.
Well, and tell me about so when you're working on a game localization project, you're working with these major developers have localization departments and teams, right? Are you working primarily with them, or do you ever find yourself in situations where you're working with other teams within the organization? I'm thinking like specifically like testing. Like what does the testing process look like? What is or if you're working on marketing content, are you working directly with these other teams, or is it typically funneled through a localization department?
Yeah, it depends. It depends really on the company. Usually, if they have a localization team, things tend to be centralized through them, which is ideal, I think, because they have all the right style guides and the right processes. They use the right technology. They use the right term bases, etc., etc. So that's the ideal. But yes, we do work with other departments as well. Namely, we work with marketing departments. We work with HR departments. This is from actual gaming companies. So that can be more challenging, and again, not ideal, but it happens. And it really depends on how the company has set up their localization structure, really.
And I want to go back actually a little bit. You mentioned that you played Sekiro in Japanese with Iberian Spanish.
And I did not beat the game, by the way.
You did? Oh, come on, it's being vulnerable on the podcast. That's all right. This is a safe space. You can be honest.
It's really hard. I don't know if anyone.
I haven't attempted it yet. I have not, but it's on my list. I'm afraid to. I'm afraid to. Because my parry timing sucks. Let's just put it that way. I play a mage build.
There's a lot of that in this game.
Yes. Yeah, I play a mage build typically, so I'm not looking forward to Sekiro. But that's neither here nor there. Subs versus dubs, basically, is what I want to ask you about. You mentioned like it would have been nicer if you had a Spanish dubbed version. How is that?
Or also like a version for Latin America, right? Because I'm from Latin America, and I was playing with the European Spanish version, which is never ideal, right? It really does disrupt your immersive experience when you're yeah, it's just like terminology and expressions and everything so different that it does disrupt it. So that was my sort of my ask to, oh, that would have been really nice
Yeah.
if we had a version for Latin American Spanish. But this game actually in particular had really good reviews when it comes to the dubbing for English. The
Okay.
fans were really happy with the dubbing work for English. And I actually watched some videos just to see what they were talking about, what they did with the voices, and I did think they did a great job too. So
Yeah.
just my honest fun opinion, but yeah, dubbing versus subtitle, that of course depends on what they want to achieve, right, with the game, what type of game it is, for what markets, etc., etc. Of course, the dubbing process is a lot more costly and long, and than the subtitling. So many times this is a very determining factor into what the developers want to do if they want to just go with subtitles.
Yeah, because I can think some of the games that are out there nowadays just have so many lines of voiceover, so many lines. It's like every NPC has 50 different things that they can say, especially with like open-ended games where you have different conversations and different responses to different things.
Yeah.
It can get very, very costly
Yes,
to
exactly.
dub
Yes.
an entire game.
Yeah. It does provide an incredible experience though
Yeah,
for the players in those markets, and it does provide more accessibility also, which is super important. So
which, yeah,
of
unfortunately
course,
though, I think
if you
it
can
comes down
afford
to
it, I think it's worth
ROI.
it.
Yeah, and yeah, it comes down to ROI too, right?
Mhm.
Are the shareholders going to be happy that I spent X amount of money to
Mhm.
get Y amount of money? Like,
Yeah, yeah. How interested are they in this market in winning over this player base,
yeah.
right?
And so, on the terms of money, in your experience working with game localization, how cost sensitive is this vertical in within the context? Because you have a lot of familiarity with the larger localization
With
industry
different
as
industries,
well,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, what are their main priorities? Are they extremely cost sensitive, or are they willing to pay a little bit more to get the right
Mhm.
team in place? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Again, this varies so much. I feel like generalizing does a disservice, really, because if we're talking about an indie game developer, the cost must be really
They have no
could be
money.
really important to them because
Yeah.
they have the funding that they have, and they might be a lot more restricted. For bigger companies and more mature companies, in terms of utilizing localization, cost is really not at the top of the list. Like really, time is very sensitive in this industry. We have special launches, um, very strict deadlines to meet, and it's very fast paced when it comes to everything really surrounding localization for this industry. Not just the game itself, but the marketing, the promotional material, everything surrounding the game, right? Because a lot of the content that we localize is not just the in-game text, but also anything surrounding the game. Again, it can be
Yeah.
legal documents, it can be packaging, it can be the game manual, it can be marketing, promotional, editorials, etc. All sorts of different things. So time is of the essence, really, in this industry. So deadlines, I would say, probably the most important thing. Like, are you able to meet the requirements for deadlines, and then quality. And when I talk about quality here, um, it really encompasses like how are you gonna be win over our player base in this market. Like it really needs to go above and beyond
There's a big
where
like
you're
user
resonating with
experience.
the players. Yeah,
Yeah.
in a way, are you using like transcreation, and you like conveying the say humor of the game in the same way? Are you going to be able to connect with that audience? And this audience notices. I
Sure.
can tell you,
Yeah.
gamers
They
notice,
notice
and
and they
they will
post
be
about it
very
online.
vocal about it.
They have Twitter accounts and they're not
Yes,
afraid to use
yes,
them.
and forums and
And Quora
Discord and
and
all these. Yes,
Reddit and yeah.
Yes, they will be loud about this. So usually that's extremely important because it's a work of art, and developers have,
Yeah.
poured their heart and soul into this game, like thought about every possible detail, like every line that they, tweaked to have this like witty meaning and things like that. So they're really handing you like their baby and be like, are you gonna be
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
like
Take care of it.
produce the same results in the other markets? Because like it's so important to us, like the tone, the voice, like the references, everything in the game. Um, so that's, I would say, is a lot more important to this industry than pricing.
Well, and because of, so while we're on the topic of pricing, and because this seems like a very creative endeavor, um, there's an ongoing debate. There always will be an ongoing debate in our industry about pricing structure and per
Mm-hmm.
word pricing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And people ask me, do you think per word pricing is a good model? And
Mm-hmm.
my answer is no, it's not. But I think it's the best model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's what we have right now.
Okay, right,
So.
exactly. But this seems like we were getting into multimedia and game and interactive
Mm-hmm.
localization, and I haven't even asked you about metaverse, but I suppose I should ask you about that. Um, Per word pricing is kind of becoming obsolete because the level of detail and insight and research and all of
Mm-hmm.
these things that you're expecting of the localizers is not really conducive to per word pricing. How do you reconcile that when you're
Yeah.
asking the translators to do so
Yes.
much?
Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% agree that in this in
And
this
I'll say I
particular.
know you're a big translator advocate, right? So that's one of
Yes,
the
I mean, I'm
things
a
that
translator myself, so
exactly.
like I completely understand this role. Like
Yeah.
I remember, um, I remember translating games myself where I was like, this game is like all rhymes. It's all poetry and it rhymes, and you need to like localize. Like
And I'm getting
it
paid the
took
same per word
forever to
rate.
localize this game. You
Yeah.
can't pay that per word.
Right.
Like if you pay that per word, what does it mean? It's gonna take like 2 hours of your work when reality might take like 2 days
Right.
to actually do that, right? So I think that's where it's really important, where ideally the person that you're working with, like your client, so to say, understands the process. Usually when they have a localization team in-house, they have a lot more understanding of what it entails. So these are very important conversations to have, like if for example, this character list that we have will require that the players, like the linguists, actually play the game, spend hours of their day playing the game to understand the dynamics, or watching videos of gameplay of the game. Those things definitely, I think, should be compensated accordingly. So it should be talked with the developers, right? Like we will need this amount of hours from the linguists so that they can and watch all these videos, get all that reference material, and then we might need like these extra hours because the amount of like transcription that will be needed for these names, if that's what's decided, for example, to
Sure.
transcreate those, it will be different than a per word rate. So those are conversations that it's really important to have with your clients, and
Yeah.
clients will understand. Like if you
So they do. Okay,
sit
good.
down with them and explain and show, and they will understand. They won't be usually unreasonable with those things. But that's why it's important also to really understand the specialization,
Well,
because we're not talking about I'm sending you a document translated back and where I'm paying you a per word rate,
yeah.
and that's it. That might not be the end of the story for the specialization.
And,
Can have a lot of more different things, a lot more complex.
okay. And it sounds to me like the clients that you are dealing with really understand the value of quality localization, which isn't always the case in other verticals. In other verticals, you really have to explain to them, like, here's
Mhm.
what could happen if you have a bad.
Mhm.
So it sounds to me like those conversations are not only possible, but can actually be met with, can
Yeah.
be welcomed by the clients.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the ideal client, right? Or the one that understands what you do and listens to you and wants to have those conversations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are fortunate to work with clients like that, and it's really a pleasure to work that way. But you have everything. Like you have people who don't understand and need more consulting
Sure, sure,
or
sure.
more information, or deeper conversations about certain things. And um, yeah, it
As
varies
always,
across
it
the board so
depends.
much.
It depends. A consultant's favorite answer, right?
It
So
depends.
it
Yes.
depends. We have just one more question from chat, and I think we'll start wrapping it up here. But Danielle Ferrari asked, "Is the localization into Latin American varieties quite a common practice nowadays? I've
Hmm.
seen some localizations into Mexican Spanish, for instance. Life is Strange too. Thanks."
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
what is the typical? And of course, it's going to depend, right?
Hmm.
Oh, and then I'll read the follow up.
I'm gonna direct you to another article I wrote for Multilingual magazine that talks about this specific subject, about Latin American Spanish, and like um, that's a subject I'm very passionate about because that is my native language. Usually, and I'm going to generalize here, companies will go to neutral Latin American Spanish because it can be understood by over 20 languages in Latin America. And sure, it's not ideal because it's a sort of like a more washed out version of Spanish, right? It doesn't use so many colloquialisms or slang or things that are specific to a certain country, regionalisms, right? And so it lacks that, but it has that understanding. Like Latin American people are very used to consuming multilingual, multimedia content into Latin American Spanish. Like things are dubbed and subtitled into a neutral Latin American Spanish. So we're very used to consuming that, and and it works for so many different countries, right? Now, some publishers and developers will go further and localize for a specific variant if they are particularly interested in that market, and if it makes sense for the type of game, the type of genre,
Mhm.
and the player base that they have in that place. So for the game that you were mentioning that they localize into Mexican Spanish, that's a common variant that people would go to if they have a good player base in Mexico and they really want to target Mexico and they want to be able to use more like regionalisms and things. But also there's a lot of misunderstanding in this regard, where people are talking about Mexican Spanish, but they actually mean Latin American Spanish, and they want to target everyone else. So it varies, but you can read the article and let
So
me know what you think, because I
there's your
have
answer,
opinions on the subject.
Danielle. So the article is "The Challenge of Localizing Video Games for Latin American Spanish." You can just search for it at multilingual.com. And I believe it's from 2021. So go check it out. One more, I lied. One more comment that's slipping through in at the last moment here. At the last minute here, Kyle Chow asked, "It was mentioned in the article that, quote, the developers took great care in portraying aspects of Japanese history and culture in beautiful detail, but that immersion can get lost to Western audiences. Given that much of this immersion is dependent upon knowing all these Japanese history and cultural things, do you think there's any way to get around this, or do we just need to accept that much of this will be lost in translation?"
Kyle, yes. I mean,
That's a good question. That's a
that is a
thought-provoking
really good
question.
question, because yes, many things will inevitably be lost just because language itself is different and culture itself is different, and you cannot replicate something exactly the same way, right? I think in the particular case of this game, though, the fact that some of these references could have been included in the localization is what frustrated some of the fans, right? It's like in particular names that carry meaning beyond the name, right? They're not just a name. They are making a reference to something very specific that should not be lost. Like they're little details, but then again, yes, I agree with you. Of course, you cannot replicate old Japanese culture and language references,
And,
especially the type of language that is used in the game.
and
Just
there's kind of
again,
the appeal to
archaic.
it, right?
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm,
there's an appeal to that. Like
mm-hmm,
different, being exposed to a different culture. Like you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
want it
Mm-hmm.
localized 100%, right?
Right.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the appeals to a game like Sekiro is for a
Right.
Western audience is getting a glimpse into that culture.
Exactly. And there are many things that as a fan you can look up, right? Like Sekiro in Japanese is making reference to that the main character has one arm and is a like a wolf. So it means one armed wolf, basically, the name. And you don't get that in the localization. You get Sekiro. So if you are interested in learning more, you can always like research more and be like, oh, actually Sekiro
Well, that's a great example.
referencing
Like,
this, right?
why not translate the name of the game to One-Armed Wolfman,
It
right?
could have been done.
It could
It
have
could
been
have
done.
been a very like like risky thing to do, maybe, but it could have been localized as a one-armed wolf.
Yeah.
Also, like Sekiro sounds a lot cooler, but it could have been. Those are just like honestly important decisions that developers and publishers need to take.
Yep. All right. Well, now we are running out of time. So thank you, everybody in chat. Go check out terratranslations.com, everybody. Follow Marina on LinkedIn. Marina, any closing thoughts before we wrap this up for today?
Well, if anyone is going to go to Lock World next
right.
month, I will be talking there. I will be doing two presentations, one about localization of marketing content for the gaming industry, and then another one about the metaverse and XR technology applied to localization. So I hope to see you there. If anyone's watching and wants to come say hi,
You'll see me there, Marina. I will be
Nice.
there. I need to book it. I still haven't got my ticket yet. I still haven't prepared my presentation yet. But supposedly I'm presenting and I will be there. So I will see you there as well as everybody else. So I will close it out here. Thank you very much. I appreciate our guest today, Marina Ilari. I appreciate my colleagues here at Nimdzi Insights doing all the hard work. I appreciate everybody in our industry responding to industry surveys and scheduling briefings with us so that we can include you in our latest published industry research. And finally, I appreciate you, the audience, who are joining us live today, all of the dialogue and chat, everyone who left questions, comments, and especially criticisms. And I look forward to next time. Cheers.